Hi there, and welcome to Peninsula Players Presents, the history of Peninsula Players Theatre. And I am here once and evermore with Audie. Audie, how you doing?
I'm doing good today, Craig. Good to see
Ec-
you.
Excellent, excellent. I'm kind of excited about doing this one because, as we were just saying, it's like a pivot point in the history of the theater.
It really
And
is, and I know everybody's itching to find out what happens next. So I was too,
yes,
and I've learned
oh,
things along the way on this one. So
oh, and absolutely.
yeah,
So, we're going into 1961, but just to catch up with where we left things in 1960, largely because Caroline had spent so much time in the hospital after a car accident she had in New York. And with the building of the pavilion, both of those things contributed to financial problems with the theater, and they accumulated to the point where the theater is to be sold at public auction. But in the 60s, many angels stepped in, both Peninsula Players alumni, community leaders, and especially and including the Bank of Sturgeon Bay and Mr. Clifford Herlash, who did a great deal for the theater. So they had given the theater a grace period till December 16th, 1960 to refinance the mortgage, but that date passed.
hmm
And in December of 1960, the sheriff, Marvin Zwicky, and I don't mean to make him a villain at all, he's just doing his job.
yeah,
He puts up a notice of for the public auction of Peninsula Players Theater, and it's going to be on Saturday, February 11th at 10 a.m. at the front door of the courthouse of Sturgeon Bay.
yes. And newspaper articles across the state are announcing the sale and that it's a cash sale. So that's very specific that they have to have the cash on hand in order to purchase it. And there's a lot of speculation as to who may be bidding.
Mhm.
And there also was articles stating and actually encouraging bidders to think that it doesn't have to just be a theater. There was one article I found that the theater land is considered good mercantile land, and the theater could be turned into a store. And I was
And
okay.
it
So
kind of, we both kind of shudder to think if what would have happened if
right,
that was the case. And
right.
there was also the University of Wisconsin expressed interest.
There was another speculation that they wanted to convert it into a cultural center and use it as a place to kind of combine interests that were like the clearing and like the Peninsula Musical Festivals, so that they could use it as a center. And so that was a speculated that that might happen as well. And the creditors, of course, were hoping that the bids were going to be high enough that they would get their money back
Right.
from unpaid bills. So
And the university expressed that, and Mr. Herlash at the bank, um, legally, the bank could only bid the amount of the mortgage,
correct.
and
Yes.
they could not go over that. And he said that there were to be, he thought, at least two more bidders,
hmm
as there were. So we get to February 11th, 10 a.m., and there are four bidders that show up. Of course, the number one,
hmm
Mr. Herlash from the Bank of Sturgeon Bay, and he's been extremely involved in the theater and helpful. And
He had been. He was a guiding hand for finances, just trying to keep things flowing and helping the box office with their deposits and everything the previous season. So, and he feels a lot of weight. He feels very, he wants to make sure everything's there for the community. So he's feeling a little bit of pressure too at
right,
this.
right, and trying to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then a second bidder is a man named Jack Ginsburg.
And he's a scrap metal dealer in Sturgeon Bay, and he is going to play part in the auction as well.
And we have no idea why he's bidding
No,
or what he would do with it if he
no,
got it.
not at all. There's no follow-up to it. So, but he's there along with
Yes,
50 other spectators.
that's right.
So
That's
there's
right.
quite a crowd gathering at the courthouse, and they couldn't all fit on the steps. So I think they went inside, at least to in front of the courthouse doors and in a hallway. So
Really, in February, they went inside.
they went inside in February. Imagine that.
And the third bidder was Madeline Turtelot, who we have mentioned before. She was with the Peninsula Art School. She was a filmmaker, and she had been an actress at Peninsula Players in 1958 and 1960,
Yes.
and will be again in
And will be again. And
1962.
she was just a huge supporter of the arts and often hosted opening night parties at her home. And as a filmmaker, I'm sure got involved with the talented actors and actresses that were there and maybe used them in some of her films. So
Yeah, and if she won the bid, her plan was to assume personal responsibility for the theater and run it,
and run it and keep it going. Yes.
keep it going. And her bidding went through her lawyer, Torval Toft, who we'll hear a little bit more about as we go forward. And then the fourth bidder was a man named Kenneth Corrode, who was a New York tax attorney. So there we are. We're at 10 a.m. and the bidding starts. As you say, there are a lot of people watching, and you have to remember that the bidding happened all within an hour.
Yes.
It was very, and it was intense.
And it was an intense hour, a very dramatic hour is how it's often been described in the press.
So Mr. Herlesh with the bank, his first bid was $28,287.10, which was the value of the mortgage.
Yes.
But legally, he couldn't go higher than that. He couldn't.
Right, he
even bid a
couldn't.
dime.
So
Yeah.
once somebody outbid him, he was done and out for the count. And that's exactly what Torval did. So Madeline Turtelot's lawyer then bid a few extra dollars to $28,300.
300, and Mr. Herlish and the bank were done. So then Jack Ginsburg, this mysterious scrap dealer man from Sturgeon Bay, he countered that with 28,700.
Great. And so there, little quietness going on. And then, Toft counters that one. And he rounded it up to 28.8, and then Mr. Toft, then it went to 28.9 by Mr. Ginsburg.
Mr. Ginsburg. And then Torval from 28.9, he made it 29 even.
Even Steven. And at that point, Mr. Ginsburg decides to drop out. So,
and I'm sure he was a very nice man, but I think we're glad to see him go because we don't know what he would have done with
I don't know.
But at this point, someone steps in who most of the people there don't know, Kenneth Corrode.
Yeah. And he's a total stranger. Nobody recognizes him or knows who he is, but he enters the bidding process or enters the fray, as they say, with 29,500.
Yes. And then from there, for a little while, the two, Kenneth Corrode and Torval Toft, they up the bid by $100 or $200 till they get to 31,800. And then Kenneth stops things for a second.
He stops them for a second because it is an auction for cash. He's questioning if Torval has the cash on hand. So he wants to pause the auction to show, okay, do we all have the cash for this? And so they pause, everybody takes a look, and they move on.
And
so they think it was a strategy session so that he could kind of plan his next steps.
So then Torval got to 32,500 as they incrementally kept upping the bid. And then things stopped again, and Kenneth talked to Torval.
Well, he wanted to talk to Torval.
That's right.
He wanted, because he got the feeling that they were both interested in continuing, interested in the same idea of the purchase. And so he wanted to see if they could work together and not have to keep bidding up higher, but Torvald didn't want to talk to him. He denied a conversation. So,
So that didn't happen. And then they went back to the bidding.
yep.
And Torval went to 37,800. And Kenneth
And then Kenneth, I believe at that point went up to 38,000.
even.
Even Steven.
And then that's where Torval shut up.
Yep.
And the auctioneer or the sheriff, I'm not sure who does, if they did
Right.
that going once, going twice, going 3 times, sold. And the Kenneth Corrode at 38,000, which is $10,000 more than the mortgage.
Right. Yep.
And he now owns the real estate and the buildings.
Right. Correct. And so he, and then immediately announces his plans to form a corporation to continue with theater at the property. So it was kind of nice to hear that right away.
So that was pretty tense and exciting to go through as we were uncovering it all.
It was, and it was very fun to also find out that Mr. Herlash was there and got to meet Mr. Corrode, and Mr. Herlash is quoted as saying he feels 4 feet taller and 15 pounds lighter after Mr. Corrode purchases the theater. So he's but relieved.
Yes, as I'm sure everyone at the theater was. And now the big question is, who the heck is Kenneth Corrode?
Exactly.
And why was he there?
And so we did a little digging, and what I've discovered in looking at Mr. Corrode's life is he was a very prominent tax attorney and a very prominent tax expert in New York City. And
I think you said that he had his salary was
right in 1942, I believe. I found an article that listed like the highest paid salaries in the country, and Bing Crosby at the time was earning $300,000. And Mr. Corrode at the time was a lawyer for a retail company, WT Ward, I believe was the name of it. It's like a Montgomery Ward or a retail store, but he was earning $40,000 a year in like the early 40s. So, and he was a scholarship winner. He was very intelligent, and he earned a Harvard law degree on scholarship, and then continued his law practice focusing on tax law. He actually had court cases not only before the state court of New York, but also testified and brought cases to the United States Supreme Court and testified on tax law to senators and commissions. So he was a real expert in his field of tax law. And he also invested in other properties. So
yes, and we find out that also some 4 years before this, he met Caroline Fisher in Chicago. We don't know how that happened, but they were acquainted.
So he learned about the theater at that time. And we also found out that this wasn't the first theater that he saved.
Mm-hmm.
And in looking into his history in the 50s, about 10 years prior, he, in Greenwich Village, New York, purchased a block of properties that was going to be under demolition and reconstruction. And
to build an apartment building, I believe.
To build yes. And so they were going to revamp it, but he really felt that it had some historical significance. So he got a group of investors together, and they purchased the whole block, including Cherry Lane Theater and what is known as the Skinny House. It's an architectural interesting. Yeah, the Malay House is also its name. So
and the interesting thing that Edna St. Vincent Millay, the poet, was one of the founders of Cherry Lane Theater in the early part of last century, and she lived in this skinny house also.
And it's called the Skinny House because it's only 9.5 feet wide and 3 stories tall. So it's a very unique building. And I guess in historical context, they just filled the space of what was to be the alley. That was an alley entrance to to back there, but they just filled it like a row
And
house.
an interesting thing now is the current owner paid something like 3.5 million for it and lives
Right.
there now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and previous tenants, so the poet lived there, the Pulitzer Prize winning poet, and quite a few other artists and bohemian artists, including Cary Grant and John Barrymore, have stayed in this home while they were either working at the Cherry Lane or other facilities. And then, so also in addition to the Cherry Lane, there was the Cherry Lane restaurant. And so Mr. and Mrs. Corrode continued to own and operate the Cherry Lane restaurant next to the Cherry Lane Theater. And
Uh-huh.
above the Cherry Lane Theater, actress Kim Hunter lived there for almost 40 years and raised her family there. And Kim Hunter was the actress who received the Oscar for A Streetcar Named Desire, playing,
Stella.
yeah. So it is all fast. So he has this fascination with historic buildings, and he owned another home in another historic section of New York, the Charleston King Van Dam historic section, which is where a mansion was that goes all the way back to George Washington being present there, Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, and you can go research the history of this place. But he was really fascinated in preserving things and places that had historical significance, and to help make sure that they could continue on for generations. So I think when he heard Caroline's plight of this place that had been around for 25 years and was an artistic jewel, he felt somewhat of a calling to save it and to invest in it and to help get it on its feet.
And Caroline had gone to Kenneth in New York to see if he could help. And with his background, he clearly wanted to. Also, he had a connection with Westport Country Playhouse, where Jim McKenzie was the general
He
manager.
did, yeah, right, and he did, and he also had a firm belief in keeping the artistic side of the theater and the financial side separate. So he really wanted to make sure in going forward that those two things didn't, that they each had their own job to do. And so as we move forward, we're going to see a restructuring within the theater itself, whereas now Caroline was kind of an actor manager type of situation within the structure of the company. We're now going to start to see things divided between artistic and business.
So that's the Kenneth Corrode that showed up at the public auction and saved the theater. And
Yes.
we entitled this The Biggest Angel of All because
He did, and
was.
because he didn't only just pay for the bidding on the auction, he also then had to purchase the property, the equipment from the Bank of Sturgeon Bay.
And he paid about $1,200 for that
to run the theater. There was an insurance premium that he had to pay and some additional back taxes.
Yes.
So he put all of that together, and he was also saying that it was an investment group that purchased it. So people get together, put in investments, but he was the leader of this team that had the funds to save Peninsula Players.
So after doing all of that and paying cash for it, after the auction, they went up to the theater.
They did. A reporter whom we believe to be Chan Harris took him on a tour because he had never been there before. So he was very excited to see the natural beauty of the location, and noticed and took note of what equipment needed updating or what damages might have occurred that needed fixing, so that the investors knew what they would need to do to get things going for the next season.
And as you said, his intention was to make sure that the theater was better managed. And in March of 1961, then Jim McKenzie had once again entered the picture.
Yes, he did. And Jim announces that he's gotten into a long-term lease with Mr. Corrode to produce theater at Peninsula Players. And he is going to do that in association with his wife, Jean Boland. So Jim is going to be the executive producer in association with Jean Boland, the associate producer. So the two of them together are going to continue to work. And Kenneth Corrode said, didn't dismiss Caroline. she said that she had done a wonderful job and fantastic job in getting things started, and would continue to use her in advisory capacity on what shows and other things theatrical.
Right. And I think that both Jim and Jean felt they were keeping a promise to Caroline in keeping the theater going. And she
Mhm.
stayed on as an advisor.
She
That's
did, yes, and they did, and I recall reading once Jim saying that, when you're there 1 year, it's one thing, but when you're there 2 years at Peninsula Players or beyond, it really becomes a part of you, and so you really want to make sure that that is there for other artists,
yes.
and
I think that's very true. I see that all the time.
yep.
If they've spent a little bit of time there, all of a sudden they're invested and
Mm.
they leave a bit, if not all of their heart there.
Exactly. Yeah, we just started yesterday.
Oh, hardly. So, so at this point, with Jim taking over as a producer, and they start getting more organized and talking about better management, which we will go into. But at this time in the program, there was a message from the producers that Jim and Jean composed, and this was part of what they said. The theater as a whole can enrich the lives of all who come in contact with it. It is a place for the actor to create an illusion. It provides the audience a chance to enjoy, understand, and select new ideas. The resident stock company, such as the Peninsula Players at Fish Creek, is of utmost importance to theater. Here is a means for young new talent to learn stage techniques, protocol, and deportment. Here is a way for them to apply the theories they have learned elsewhere. Without resident stock, the professional theater as an entirety would most surely suffer, for it is here that new talents can develop and developed talents can continue to grow. We shall try to be worthy of the faith you have shown in us. Our standards will be high. And that was some of what was the message at the beginning of the season as Jim and Jean were taking over. And I'm happy to say that I completely agree with all of that, and that we've tried to sustain that as in our time at the theater.
Exactly, and I think that's, when we were talking ahead of time, it's what I said I fell in love with was this nurturing, being able to nurture future talent or nurture the craft and let everybody go on to and then move on. So just to be a part of it, it's yeah, I have no words.
Well, it is a little emotional all the time for both of us. And we're going to stop
Yeah.
here because what we discovered as we were going through all of this, this particular
Mhm.
history at this time, was that at this moment, when Jim and Jean took over, it was like a pivot point, a balance. You think
Mhm.
and the theater started going in, remained essentially the same, but started going in a new direction. It was more organized. It was
Right.
more responsible,
Mhm.
and we thought that the next time that would be a great place to start.
Exactly. And then we'll introduce you to some new faces too.
Oh, indeed. Oh, there's some more. There's some really, really interesting stories coming up, and we'll keep you apprised of that. So, Audie, whew,
Oh,
well,
I
we got through
know.
that auction, and we figured it out.
Sold.
So, so I hope you were sold too.
Yeah.
So thanks, Audie.
Oh, thanks, Greg.
Yes, that was fun to go through. And we will see you next time.